You know that feeling, right? That pit in your stomach just before a huge exam, that feeling like everything is riding on this one moment. Well, for decades, we've pretty much just accepted that stress is part of the deal with education. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if we could stop that whole domino effect of anxiety and pressure before it even starts? The research we're going to dive into today suggests we can. It's a completely different way of looking at tests, not as something that breaks students down, but as a tool we can use to actually build them up. So here's the game plan. First, we'll get into the real cost of our current exam culture and see how it leads straight to burnout. Then, we're going to flip the script and talk about the solution, the power of resilience, a whole new way to test, and some simple strategies to make it happen. And finally, the best part, we'll look at the proof that this thing actually works. Okay, let's get right into it. If you want to solve a problem, you gotta understand just how big it is. And, when it comes to academic stress, the main culprit is probably exactly what you think it is. And look, this isn't just a hunch or some anecdotal evidence. When researchers actually went out and surveyed medical students, asking them, hey, what causes you the most stress? The answer was just crystal clear. It wasn't the insane workload, it wasn't the competition. Nope. The undisputed #1 stressor was tests and examinations. What's really fascinating, though, is when you dig into the data, it gets even more specific. Turns out the most anxiety-inducing tests are things like OSCEs and case presentations. The ones where you're performing and there's an examiner right there evaluating you. The more it feels like a personal judgment, the higher the stress goes. So we've established that exams are a huge source of stress. But that stress, it doesn't just sit there. It actually kicks off this really dangerous chain reaction. So let's trace that path from start to finish. The research lays it out as this really clear 3-step process. First, you have the academic stress from the exams. That leads directly to a broader psychological distress. We're talking anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. And when that distress goes on long enough, it ends in what we all know as burnout. And this really shows you the scale of that chain reaction. I mean, think about this. Before a big exam period, about a quarter of students said they felt psychological distress. But during that exam period, that number skyrockets to nearly 60%. It more than doubles. That is a massive psychological toll that's all centered around testing. And this is exactly why burnout is such a big deal. It's not just about feeling tired. It actually leads to worse academic performance, less empathy, and even unprofessional behavior. So these aren't just student problems, right? They're future professional problems that could end up impacting all of us. Okay, but this is where the story takes a turn for the better. What if there was another option, a different path than the one to burnout, a way to face that pressure, not by breaking, but by bouncing back even stronger? Well, this is where the idea of resilience comes in. At its core, resilience is really just this. It's the ability to adapt. It's about facing a challenge, like a super high-stakes exam, and not just getting through it, but actually learning and growing from the whole experience. This slide just lays out the choice so clearly, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the path to burnout, which leads to exhaustion and feeling like a failure. But on the other side, you've got the path of resilience, which leads to growth, confidence, and composure. The goal then has to be designing an education system that pushes students toward the right side of this chart. So how in the world do we actually do that? How do we build a testing system that actively encourages resilience instead of crushing it? Well, this brings us to the actual blueprint for making that happen, a model called the Systematic Assessment for Resilience Framework, or SAR for short. So this is the SAR framework. It's basically a complete redesign of the whole assessment process. You can see it's a cycle built around 5 key phases. It starts with assessment preparation and goes all the way around to student reflection. And each of these phases is specifically designed to help build one of 4 core traits of resilience, which you can see in those color-coded arrows: self-control, management, engagement, and growth. Now, this all sounds great in theory, but the real power of the SAR framework is how practical it is. This isn't just some big abstract idea. It's a collection of real, actionable strategies that any educator can start using. Let's just zoom in on 4 of the 17 strategies to see what we're talking about. First, mock exams. They just demystify the whole thing and cut down on that fear of the unknown. Second, clear rubrics. This is all about being transparent. No surprises. Students just do better when they know exactly what the target is. Third, offering real, constructive feedback. That turns a one-time judgment into a learning tool that they can actually use. And finally, creating a safe, non-threatening environment. I mean, it sounds simple, but just building a rapport, even using a little humor, can completely change a student's mindset from this is a threat to this is a challenge. All right, let's get to the most important part of this whole thing, the proof. Does redesigning tests this way actually make a difference? Well, researchers put the SAR framework to the test in a medical school, and the results? They speak for themselves. The results are pretty incredible. After they put these strategies into practice, student resilience didn't just go up a little bit, it significantly increased. And at the exact same time, every single negative indicator we've been talking about, anxiety, depression, burnout, and academic stress, all saw a significant reduction. It just worked, across the board. So the big takeaway here is that we can fundamentally change what testing is. We can take the single biggest source of academic stress and turn it into a powerful engine for building resilience in students. And that really leaves us with one final, pretty big question. If we can redesign something as massive and as dug in as the exam, what other parts of education are we ready to rethink?